Hi everybody, today we're going to be making some blocks to go in a Storm at Sea quilt. It's just a lap size quilt, but you can make it bigger if you like. We're going to be using the Westalee adjustable rulers for cutting. So I'm using the 24 inch, but you can use the 36 inch just as well. I'm using the half square triangle, the quarter square triangle, isosceles triangle, half isosceles, and then the square and a square trim guide. Now I'm going to lay out all my fabric and get cutting. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to explain a little on how some of these adjustable rulers work. So this is just a shorter version at 12 inches. So with our half square triangle, it tells you along here that it's on the bias. Now this can be adjustable right up to a 6-inch finished half square triangle. So this ruler actually takes all the maths out of thinking for you. It's already in the ruler. So if we know that we want to have a 2-inch finished half square triangle, we line it up on the 2. Now some of the rulers, like these, you just have the screws, the little screws here that you use a screwdriver to undo and slide it and adjust it and then retighten it. The actual longer rulers, like these, we have what we call thumb screws. And the reason we have those is because this is the one that you adjust mostly up and down. So we know we want, for piece E, we want it to be a 2-inch half square triangle. So what we do is we turn our triangle upside down so that the tip is down here at this end. We undo our screw and we have our tip of the triangle butting up against the black backing piece. We move it to the other end and do the same. Always go back and check your first end, because sometimes it might be out just a tiny little bit because of the angle you may have had the back at. So now we know how wide we need to cut our strips to get a 2-inch finished half square triangle. So with these PCs, what we're going to do is cut these up into smaller half square triangles. Now you'll note that on this ruler it says bias. So that means when we go to cut this first one, and we can actually layer these, which I might do because they're exactly the same. So we line up the 45-degree line on the ruler with the edge of the fabric. Now, getting our rotary cutter, we're going to just cut along there. Then we're going to move these out of the way. Then we'll simply slide our ruler along, having the black butting up against our previous cut edge, and we're going to get that. So now we've got our pieces. So we're going to cut now. Just reline these up. It's just important to get that bias edge. And so as you can see where it says bias, we are now running along the bias there. So we're going to butt that edge up there. Now this is the other thing. When I'm cutting away from there. But when I go to cut this side, I can't cut that direction, because what it does is pushes the fabric away. So always cut back like so. So there's our first 2 triangles. Now with this next cut, it's very clever the way this works. We line our ruler up there. All right, get rid of the offcut. And there's our triangles. Now we'll use this bit. Now we've got 2 options. Normally if it was longer, you would just simply run that along there, but because it's not a longer strip, we'll just flip that around. Now we'd already cut that edge, but we can re-trim it and then trim that size. And then our last corner that we had. Now this ruler takes your seam allowance of a scant 1/4 inch into consideration, and it's included in your little block. So you need to go through and cut all the E blocks just like that. So they're a 2-inch half square triangle. Now we'll move on to the next one. Okay, so in the white, we need, for the C block, we need 16 4-inch half square triangles. So once again, I've adjusted my ruler to the 4-inch. I'm going to poke that under there, just double check. That end's good. And that end's out a little bit. Just double check this one again. Right, so once again, we're going to line up the 45-degree line with the edge of our cut fabric. Now this one's only a single layer, that's okay. So I just come in slightly from the corner, and I've got the 45-degree line on my ruler lined up along there, and I'll cut that. Move that out of the way. We slide along until it butts up against the edge. Cut again. Now this is a much bigger piece than the little one we did for the 2-inch. So we'll get more out of each row. So I'm just going to show you those 3 rows so you get the idea of what we're doing. All right, so there we are, we have that one. So we can simply place our ruler on there. And there's our first triangle. Now for this one, I'm going to turn that over. There's our second one. Now this is what I was saying before. So we could actually turn our ruler around and cut from that direction, or by having it this way, if we line up first this edge and then the edge of the ruler just here where that corner is, we'll cut this one and we'll cut this one, and then there's that row all cut. Now the next row works the same. So we're lining up that corner just there. Take care that you don't push the ruler too far onto the fabric and cause it to bunch up. And you can see we've got another one on the end that will fit. So I'm just going to turn that around. And there is a chart which I will include with this pattern on helping you calculate how big your pieces of fabric need to be, depending on the size of your half square triangles and the quantity that you need. All right, so I'm going to continue to cut all of those, and then we'll move on to the isosceles triangles. Okay, so before doing the isosceles, I thought I'd do the quarter square triangle. So they work much the same as the half square, except we want our bias to be on the edges of the triangle, not along the base. So what we're going to do, I've got my 2 strips of fabric here. I've placed that on the 4-inch. I'll move up. Double check the other end. Yep. It doesn't look quite right. There we go. All right, so now we know the width of our strips that we need to cut. Now I've actually folded this in half. I've actually got one stacked on top of the other rather. So if I line that up along there, okay. Right, so now we'll take our quarter square triangle and we'll line up that, and as you can see where the bias is written, that will be the bias of the triangles. So once again, so that becomes scrap, and there's our first 2 triangles. And then moving along, if we line up this edge and then line up the corner just there, there is our next few cut. So I'll just continue my way along. So as you can see, there's no wastage except for the little bit on the end. So I'll trim those up and then we'll move on to the next one. Okay, so isosceles triangles. So these work exactly the same way, where you line up and affix your edge. That's the whole one, and this is the half. Now, to do this Storm at Sea block, when I was playing around initially, I made a sample block. And traditionally, you're supposed to have 2 triangles that are cut in half and then joined with a seam. I decided I didn't want that extra seam in there. I would prefer to have it as an entire diamond, which is what I've done there. Now, to get that, this is an 8-inch finished block. So what I needed to do was to actually move this up to eliminate my seam allowance that we're not using. So I've set this at 3 3/4. Now, it's all in the pattern that tells you that, but for the half isosceles triangles, we're still setting it at 4-inch because we need that. So once again, set this at 3 3/4 inches and we're ready to go. Now with our pieces here, it's quite a wide piece, and to get that diamond without the seam allowance, we're folding it in half across the width of the fabric. Now it's still got the selvage on here, so we'll come in a little bit. And what we're going to do is line up the edge of the ruler on the folded side. And we're going to, so we're just going to butt that up. Cut our first one. So there we have the first one. Now, we're then going to utilize the other side because we only need the folded edge side for our diamonds. I didn't want to waste that off cut over there. So we're going to line up our half isosceles along the edge here and on the raw edge. Remember, this one's cut at 4 inches. And then we're just simply going to cut like that. I'll just move that out of the way. And the half isosceles has a little tip that you need to trim away, little point there. So there we have the first of those. Now I wanted to do another one, but because you can't flip your ruler over, what we're actually going to do, and I do specify in the pattern, leave a gap. So I'm just going to line that up, and we know that that will fit. All right, we don't want to make it exact, so you can have a couple of little extra millimeters in there. So all up, you'd have about 3/4 of an inch gap between when you cut this one and this one. Okay, so that's about 3/4 of an inch. So instead of stopping to cut these, if we just simply cut the diamonds and then come back and cut our half isosceles triangles from that bit that's left in the middle. All right, so I've only finger pressed this fabric. I didn't iron it. All right, so there's one that we can come back and cut. So there's another completed one. So moving along, as I said, leave about 3/4 of an inch. All right, and we'll work our way along this whole strip. Now we only need to do that for 4 of these, I think. Yep, about 4 of these. I'll double check that. It's in the pattern anyway. So I'll just continue along, and then we don't actually need to use all of those in between because we only need so many of the half isosceles triangles. Okay, so yeah, I was right. We only needed to cut 5 and leave the 3/4 of an inch gap. And for the rest of them, it will unfortunately be leftover fabric, but you don't need to space the rest of them out. So I've given a list of how many of everything you need to cut. And I suggest when you cut all your strips of fabric and start putting them in little stacks and everything, put a little label and against each of them so that you don't lose track of where you're up to and what is what. So we'll just go to the end of this piece of fabric. And I don't think, no, we're not going to get another one. Be aware, this particular fabric that I'm using, I've said in the pattern that all the fabrics are about 42 inches. This one actually isn't. So I've had to cut a little extra so that I can get that last diamond in. So make sure you don't shortcut yourself on your fabric, just in case your fabric's not as wide as all of the rest of them. Okay, so here is the one I cut before as we started. That's the other half that hasn't been cut. I've flipped it over so that I can use the ruler, and it's just the right size. So all I have to do is trim those little tips off, and we've got another set there to use. Now this one, just retrim that, trim those little bits there, and then back down here. And just make sure that you cut that properly. All right, so there's another set. So this set I'll have to turn over. And as you can see, I've got plenty of room there. And it's certainly better than just discarding all those pieces of fabric. That little corner is tricky to get into. And then the last one, I'll just even those up again. Flip it over. All right. And this one here has got a bit of a fold in it. Okay, so I'm going to continue with all of these and then we'll go on to the next lot. Okay, so a few more to cut. This is piece G once again. So I have it folded in half. I've got my template up against the fold line here. With this one, we don't need to cut any half isosceles triangles. So I'm just simply using the isosceles triangle to cut the diamond, and then we'll discard the pieces in between. I might have to come up with a project to utilize those. And we need 4 of this one. that's not quite wide enough. I'm going to have to cut that piece a bit longer. All right. Okay, so the next thing to do with all of our quarter square and half square triangles, we're going to use the square in a square trim guide. And the way they work, turn it around this way. Right, so where our side points are here, if we slip that over, you'll see that these black edges fit directly over. Right, and it's got a little finger hole so you can hold it. And what it gives us is this tiny little tip to cut off. And then if we turn it around, just keep that level. Do the other end as well. It means that when we go then to stitch it to a square, for instance, across here, I'll just show you one of them. So these are piece B, the squares. And these little ones are E. And you'll see now with those trimmed off, it fits exactly on there. And this saves you the problem of trying to line up exactly where you should put your triangles and having uneven overhangs on either end. So by using the little trim guide, as you can see, it lines up perfectly, and then you'll sew your scant 1/4 inch seam. So then when you fold it out, you also don't have any little dog ears that you need to trim off. So you need to go through, and there's a lot of them, and trim with your square and square trim guide all of those corners, the pointy corner down here, not the top right angled one, and then you'll, if you have that done beforehand, you'll find your piecing progresses very smoothly. Okay, so with piece A in the white, we need 64 of these half isosceles triangles. So I've cut the first one from there, and then to spin it around, line up the side edge here, move that away slightly, and trim that. Then turn it back around. Make sure the edges are still aligned. Now the thing I've got here is this wasn't folded very evenly on the edge. So what I'm going to do is just move that along and recut that edge, because it just wants to fold elsewhere. And you can also, if you're on the edge, come along and trim it off that way. All right, so that's that. So now we've got a smooth edge again. All right, so I'm going to keep trimming those until we've got 64 of them. And then I think we'll be just about ready to start piecing our different shapes together.